Hey guys, it's Sammy Warrayat, the host of the Successful Millennials podcast. I appreciate you joining in and listening to another episode geared towards proactive and driven millennials born from 1990 to 1997. For those of you who are first-time listeners, welcome. This podcast is specifically geared towards those people born in 1990 to 1997 and are trying to find motivation as well as improve some tactics of how to achieve success in the 5 major categories. I invite you to listen into the journey as I do deep dives, as well as bring in some emerging experts to discuss these categories and our experiences and how to make progress with them. The reason I picked this specific age range is because I wanted to highlight the rise of social media and smartphones technology coming up in the formative years rather than as an established adult. Myself being a millennial in that age range, I was in high school when social media really took off, as well as the iPhone, and that changed the way we grew up almost. Whereas generations who were born outside of that age range either was too young and was born into it, or they were already an adult and kind of fully developed. So what are these 5 categories? In no specific orders of importance, it's money, happiness, career/purpose, relationships, and that covers intimate, familial, and social, as well as health, and that's physical and mental health. Guys, I would love it if you can give me a review or DM me on Instagram at FinanceZilla or email me at financezilla@gmail.com. I would love to hear your feedback as well as topics that you'd like to learn more on or things that I can do better. I am a big fan, as you probably have realized by listening to a few of these episodes, of continuous improvement. So anything that you guys would like to learn more on or things that I could do better on, please let me know. And if you could share it with just one friend who you think that one of these episodes can help them with, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you guys so much. Now, let's get to the show. Hey, Jerry, how are you?
I'm good, Sammy. How about you?
I'm doing well. I appreciate your time this afternoon, or this evening rather. And I'm excited for this conversation because conflict resolution and conflict avoidance are 2 things that get talked about a lot. And I think I'm going to learn a lot in this episode, which is selfishly kind of why I do the podcast, but also to help all the audience learn a little bit as well. Tell us a little bit about your journey, though, and how you kind of became a conflict resolution coach.
Yeah, absolutely. So part of the journey is getting fired from the job I moved to Houston for. My boss was not happy with me. And so I just basically started to avoid her. And the problem is when you avoid people, you don't communicate, and then expectations just completely go off the rails. And if you're not meeting expectations, you can't expect to keep your job, right? And so eventually I was shown the door after 11 months, and which is in hindsight very generous given like the fact that I didn't get the job then and I was giving them stories instead of results, right? And you learn quickly that doesn't work. Part of the reason I got into conflict is not because I chose it, but because it chose me. Some of the situations I had to deal with where I just avoided conflict was the next job I had wrote me 4 bad paychecks. Like they bounced. And what do you do with that, right? You're just like, boss, you shorted me money again, right? I'm kind of upset. And then it's just like, well, too bad, right? Like, what's he going to say, right? You're just afraid. Eventually I took on a manager position with a different company. And unfortunately, I had technicians who were underperforming. And me still being very conflict averse and, new to taking on leadership challenges, I'm just saying, well, let me just show them grace, which is really just a cop out for being like, well, I just really rather not have this conversation. So please don't make me have it. It got so bad that management actually wrote me up and put me on a probationary plan because they said, well, yeah, your technicians are a problem, but you're not willing to hold them to a higher standard or even firing them if they are underperforming is also a problem. And so you have to get better at this. Eventually left that job, took on another job where I had to fire a pregnant woman because she just wasn't up to standard. And it's hard because you realize just because she's pregnant, you don't keep someone on just out of pity. Like that's a bad reason to keep them employee on. And so, yeah, despite her circumstances, you just have to trust that, she's going to grow up and land on her feet somehow. Other situations in my life where I dealt with conflict. At one point, I was a church class director for a singles group, and my second day after I'd agreed to become director, I found that a newer guy was sexually harassing women in the class, and they said, "Jerry, you're director, you have to handle it." And I'm like, "You didn't give me a manual. Like, this isn't fair. You got to handle it. You're in charge." Frick, like, what do I do with this? And then another situation that culminated in me just kind of refining my approach is the fact that a roommate who defaulted on his lease and basically, banked on the fact that I wasn't going to kick him out because I was too nice a guy, until I just got so fed up with it. I said, okay, nope, I have to threaten him with calling the cops if he, stays in his room any longer and just happens cited for trespassing. And so basically the overarching theme for me is going from, this idea in Asian culture where we have these unspoken expectations you're supposed to learn and kind of figure out after enough people close the door on your friendship, like just without really telling you why, right? And now you're saying, okay, no, I need to engage the situation and kind of, finesse my way into a solution with this person so that we can enjoy being around each other again. If the relationship is a long-term one that I can't avoid, right? So those are some of the many highlights that you can pick from if you want to unpack.
Yeah, we'll start with the Asian American culture that you grew up in. I grew up in an Arab American culture where it was not necessarily conflict avoidance from the fact that we just, it wasn't understood. It was just that, you didn't have the opportunity to even say anything to your parents. It was whatever they said was kind of dictatorship and down the line. And
Yep.
and that's kind of makes you just be like, take whatever anybody in a quote unquote authority position as law, and you don't even want to go against that. So how do you kind of break out of your shell and unlearn some of the things that maybe your culture, while it could be great in a lot of areas, that aspect isn't a good thing when it comes to your mental health, really?
Yeah, one of the statements that I took away from a friend who, after many years of failures as parents, recognized that you have to find the balance between affirming and challenging. And this is true of friendships, this is true of work relationships, and even the people closest to you, right? On one hand, if you appreciate them and you're grateful for them, yeah, absolutely affirm them. And at the same time, right, I think all my strongest relationships come around people that are willing to challenge me in areas that they know not even if they know, but they see opportunities to say, wow, Jerry could really grow in this area. And I want to really bring out the best in him and fulfill that, the best version of Jerry, basically, not to just use the word potential because that gets thrown around a lot, but to really say, hey, I know what kind of leader Jerry could become. And so I'm going to really challenge him to get better at this skill or so. And it's not so that he beats himself up over the fact that he still doesn't feel like he's good enough, which is what happens in a lot of honor shame settings, right? You're just kind of like, hey, Dad, I got a 95. And they're like, why did you get 100? Right. And then they emphasize challenge so much that we just shut down. Right. But then they said, well, the opposite is also true. If you swing the pendulum the other way, you just affirm all the time. And you say, well, 65 is not so bad. You're okay. And it's like, no. Like, yeah, right. A story comes to mind with a Lebanese doctor I know who's, very high achiever. And he even used this medical pun with his kids and grades. And he says, he'd be like, son, your blood is A positive. You can't settle for C's.
Nice.
Your blood is A positive. And I'm sitting there thinking that is such a medical nerd joke. And I'm just like, that's too perfect for this guy. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really a good way to put it, is to the balance between affirming and kind of not, I don't want to say caving or turning the other cheek, but a lot of things in terms of high morals or nice people, you think Gandhi or Mother Teresa, stuff like that, they always turn the other cheek and they allow maybe to be taken advantage of, but at the end of the day, their legacy is somebody of a nice person who's made some change. And I think everybody wants to be known as that and make people feel good. But how can you do that without always turning the other cheek and necessarily getting taken advantage of? I don't think anybody wants to be in that role either.
Yeah. I mean, that, and I struggled with that for a long time, where you just say, hey, no, just give in every time someone's upset with you. And then you realize, well, I feel terrible and I hate myself. This isn't cool. If my roommates leave dirty dishes in the sink again, I'm not sure why I need to keep showing them. And right. I mean, what I learned about grace is that on one hand, it is, a level of mercy you wouldn't deserve. And at the same time, it's also a level of challenge that you wouldn't get otherwise unless someone said, hey, the phrase I hear a lot is, God loves you as you are, and he loves you too much to stay there. And there's this paradox where you, on one hand, loving someone as they are, is meant to bring out the best in them and say, well, hey, if I am secure in the love of this person, then that's what actually allows me to take risks. That's what allows me to take on challenges, knowing, hey, you know what, mom and dad have my back. It doesn't mean they pay all my bills if I default on something, but it just means, hey, you know what, son, if we need to, if we need to buy you a meal just to kind of hold you over until you get back on your feet, like that's okay. And at the same time, all of this is meant to be transformational, right? Like all this is meant to lead you so that you can stand on your own 2 feet again and not like revert back to like the adolescent version of yourself.
Okay, that's an interesting perspective there, because for me it's kind of setting a boundary with
Exactly.
people is a little bit hard to do sometimes,
Mm,
but it's similar to, I guess, like maybe this analogy does work, and I want you to weigh in because you're obviously also into martial arts, but you learn martial arts to not ever use it, right?
yeah.
Use it at the worst case scenario. Is conflict resolution the same idea? You kind of use boundary setting as a way to, so that you don't really get into items where you have to deal with conflict, and it just kind of sorts itself out because of the boundaries you set.
Oh, that's a great question. On one hand, there is such thing as unhealthy conflict where, yeah, like if there are expectations that aren't being met, you have to enforce consequences, right? If people are continually late, they will continue to be late until you say, hey, you know what? I'm going to write you up if you're late 5 times in the next 6 days, right? And then,
Mhm,
and worse is that if you don't actually give them any consequences, they're going to
mhm.
lose respect for you as a leader. At the same time, I believe that maybe your take is a little different, and I'm happy to explore that. The friends that are closest to me, we still have conflict, but they're like smaller conflicts, right? It's more of
Right.
like the relationship is so healthy that when a conflict comes up, we like fix it so quickly that it doesn't feel like it's actually there. The same thing with just the conflict between your present self and your future self, right? There's a conflict there, but that's a good conflict. That's a healthy conflict, knowing that,
Mhm.
hey, what's working for you now may not work 5 years from now, right? Your definition of success will change. And, that's the irony, is that companies that are successful now, some of them die because they said,
Mhm.
well, we're enjoying the success now and we don't need to adapt. We don't need a plan B. We don't need to keep growing and improving. And guess what? Like someone's going to overtake you, right?
Right.
So yeah, on one hand, boundaries do help prevent needless conflict, is maybe the term I'm going to use there. And at the same time, I believe that if relationships are healthy, the conflict is not that it ever goes away. It's just it's dealt with in a way that actually allows people to be honest with each other and know that they can disagree without being disrespectful.
Yeah, and just like you said, like you want to surround yourself by people who can point out your kind of shortcomings and things that you can
Mhm.
improve on, and vice versa. It's feedback is important both ways, whether it be constructive or, what a lot of people I think get scared of is because it's not worded, or it feels like more it's like an attacking way.
Mhm.
But you need those types of things so that you can learn what you need to improve on.
Mhm.
So I like the way you worded that. I think what I would recommend is set boundaries on the big things. Like if being late is something that's non-negotiable, set that boundary early,
Mhm.
and
Yep.
then later on, if those other conflict resolution tactics, make it in a healthy way so that it doesn't affect the relationship. And I want to talk about certain how to actually do that, I guess, how to resolve a conflict, and then we'll talk about how does that differ based on who you're talking to. But the first steps is, how do you resolve a conflict?
Yeah, yeah. Let's here's one situation and we can change it up, depending on, the circumstances we want to unpack a little more. Let's say, I deal with this in pharmacy all the time in my pharmacy career. And, let's say a patient is upset because, either the doctor was supposed to have called in a prescription and they didn't, or, there's something else that went wrong with it, right? And the patient's all upset with me. And, this is supposed to come from your pharmacy. I expect better than this. Like, you got to fix this. And the first thing is to get curious. Wow, like, yeah, you sound really upset. What specifically are you upset about? Right. And then, you let them talk, and you don't let them talk just to let them run their mouths. Like, you pay attention, right?
Mhm.
You show them, hey, you tell them, I'm upset with this too. Like, I don't want to have to deal with this headache anymore. So yeah, to show them the first day, hey, the confrontation is to initiate contact, but now let's shift to collaboration, right? Now, hey, we're both working alongside each other to solve the same problem. We want you to make sure that you are taken care of and you get your medication, right?
Mhm.
And so now, and a tactic I'll use is, hey, you know what, I wasn't part of this situation, but I'd love to do some research to make sure I can get this resolved for you. Can you give me half an hour to like find some things out and then call you back? And usually they usually agree to that because they understand. They're like, hey, well, he's working for me. Yeah, of course, I would want the same thing in my situation. And so some people are just like, well, I need this now. Like I need this ASAP. And you just assure them, hey, I promise I'll be working as fast as I can, because then you tell them like, hey, I want this, I want the quickest resolution for you. Right. So I guess to kind of rewind on that for a second, the first is to be confident that you can find a solution, because if you have already given up from the beginning, just being like, oh, this guy's just being unreasonable and like, as long as you've kind of closed the door that on the possibility that you can actually make this guy happy and take care of it in a way that where you can feel okay about yourself, it's not going to happen. Like, or even if it does, like, to leave it to chance is not a good frame of mind, right? So the first is to believe, hey, are you confident in your ability to take care of this patient or customer or even friend or relative that is just being difficult with you? It's like, yes, okay, well, how do you want to do this now? And so when you get curious and you get collaborative, I guess is the next alliterative word we're going to say, get curious, get collaborative. And then when you do that, just things tend to go a lot better for you in terms of trying to resolve that conflict. And you can say, even if you get to an impasse with like a certain issue, like you're getting in like a heated political discussion, something like that, to say, hey, to realize at that point, you need to realize, hey, you know what? It's not about whether or not they admit that I'm right or acknowledge that I'm right. I just need to, if this fight is no longer worth my salt, let me just back off and, hey, you know what? It's not worth losing this friendship over this issue. Let's just move on. Right.
Okay, so after collaboration, is there another alliterative word that comes after that to fix, to kind of put a bow on everything?
Yeah, let's try this out. So yeah, I say get curious, then get collaborative. Then I would say find closure. I would say that because that's really what you're looking for, right? Do you say, okay, let's collaborate. Okay, so what's the solution, right? What's the best way to really come out of this? And I think, yeah, like one of the other C's is to, like forsake comfort, right? So forsake comfort, because if you stay comfortable, you're never going to solve this problem, because
Mhm.
like growth doesn't happen when you're comfortable. So be willing to, yeah, shed the comfort, get curious, get collaborative, and then find closure. I'd say if we wanted to give 4 C's, I'd start with those.
Nice. And does that change because when you're dealing with, for example, a coworker who
Mhm,
you're at the end of the day, you guys are both same part of the same team. You
mhm.
need a problem for the company to be fixed. That's one
Yeah,
issue.
yeah.
Where it's a friend where maybe you've known for years, you could kind of
Mhm,
be a little bit more, I want to say open or upfront, maybe because
mhm.
you know that person for a long time, versus a family member who, let's take it, your parents, somebody who you
Oh,
really
yeah.
still have that level of respect and maybe even fear of going to be as yourself, quote unquote, as you normally would. So
Mhm.
how would you message your message, or massage your message rather,
There you go.
to be able to communicate to those three different personalities?
Yeah, so I'll give an example. So I grew up with a Pakistani friend who I realized like one of the most frustrating habits I dealt with him was the fact that uh, he would, whenever I would invite him to do something, I don't know if this is just like his social norm and I didn't appreciate it at the time, like I was naive about it, but I would invite him to things, and then he would say, well, I'd love to, but I don't know yet. And so he would give me this vague answer that was non-committal but positive, like optimistic that he would come through for me, right? And so, let's say we're going to a basketball game, I'm invited to a basketball game, and so I'll buy a ticket for him, like expecting him to show up because he, gave me this hope that he would be there. And then
Mhm.
like he wouldn't show up. And then I would get mad at him. It's like, well, I never actually promised that. And, and this is at a stage where I was still very conflict averse. And so I wish I just had the courage and the compassion for him, right? To say, hey, look, oh, that might be another good C to rewind and put that there. Show compassion, right? But anyway, but yeah, just to say, hey, look, I'll call him Frank. So, hey, Frank, look, I spent money on this ticket because the way our conversation went, I thought you made it sound like you were really going to come, be there and, show up. And, now I'm out like, $20 because like I was banking on a promise that you said you didn't actually make. And that really hurt. I'm not here to, it'd be pretty extreme for me just to cut you off just over one incident, but if we're committed to each other as friends, how do we make sure this doesn't happen again? Right. And now I'm inviting him to collaborate instead of just giving him a directive. Hey, man, I'm just not going to buy a ticket for you anymore unless I'm going to let you buy our ticket. And that might be a solution. Maybe he's a good sport and he would be willing to say, okay, yeah, next time if I show up, I'm just going to buy my own ticket. But, in this case, right, to be able to have that courage and say, hey, you know what, if this is truly a friendship that I value, I can't be afraid of conversations like this. So that's one thing like that. The next would be, so I'll use the Jimmy Yang example for dealing with parents, right? Because he talks about how his dad set him up with a consulting job after he finished college. And he was just like, I don't want this. I'm unhappy with this. And, so he's going out trying to make it in Hollywood, right? And, at one point he's like sleeping on a friend's couch, just slumming it, just to try to survive until he catches that big break. And I think, part of it helps when you finally break through and achieve that success to show them, hey, look, mom and dad, I know you're worried for me. And, I'm going to ask you to trust that I'm going to find a way to survive and fight because you taught me well. Right. I think part of it is negotiation, right? You can just say, hey, okay, Jimmy, we're going to give you 6 months. Go ahead and try for 6 months. If you don't find any gainful work after 6 months, maybe you consider a different career, right? And so on the parents being able to let go on that side to realize, hey, you know what, I raised my kids to be able to fend for themselves and to shift from a supervisor to a consultant role and to realize, hey, you know what, maybe the best thing for me to do is to get out of the way. Because my mom is a huge rescuer. Every time I make a mistake, she just wants to shield me from mistakes or shield me from bad consequences. But the problem is, right, if she's not around and someone fleeces me for money or something like that, how am I going to learn, right? Because I've realized the only way you get better at something is to practice. So if you spend all your time avoiding conflict, how do you expect to get better at it? So, yeah.
Now a quick word for today's show's sponsor. I'm normally not a fan of nice clothes. I like comfort over style, especially because I like being active often. Habits 365 is a brand that does both. The reason I'm excited to partner with them is because their vision is in line with this podcast. Their whole message is to preach consistent improvement by creating and maintaining continuous habits 365 days a year. That sounds exactly like what I like to preach, 1% better every day. It also helps that they promote positivity around important topics like mental health and wellness, which is one of the 5 categories, as well as social justice and much more. The fact that they employ mostly millennials and are run by 2 people who are in their 20s, like myself, is an added bonus. If you're interested in supporting the show as well as getting some apparel, feel free to enjoy the code FINANCEZILLA for 15% off online purchases by using the link in the show notes. That's FINANCEZILLA for 15% off online purchases. Guys, water is super important for maintaining physical health, one of the 5 categories of the Successful Millennials podcast. Doctors always recommend at least 8 cups a day, and for every cup of coffee or tea, you should probably add another cup of water. Throw in things like pre-workout, creatine, and the fact that everybody just has different hydration needs based on, their body weight and gender, physical activity, etc. You should probably drink well over that 8 cups of water. Me personally, I drink like a gallon and a half a day. I just love water. I drink it with every meal. I drink it when I work out. I don't drink juices or anything else. That's why I'm excited to partner with the Coldest Water. They make water bottles that can preserve cold water and ice that won't even melt for 36 plus hours. Especially in the summertime heat like now, these bottles that come in different sizes are a great way to keep your water cold when running errands, hiking, or just so that you don't have to keep going to the fridge every now and then. Enjoy a personal code for 10% off our online purchases by going to the link in the bio and using the code FINANCEZILLA. That's FINANCEZILLA for 10% off online purchases. Now back to the show. Yeah, I think that's a good point. But for example, let's just play devil's advocate and dive in a little bit more. 6 months go by, and in Jimmy's example, he doesn't get that break, and now your parents are putting even more pressure. Plus, you're already stressed because you're trying to chase something that is not working in 6 months, and you know that you shouldn't chase instant gratification, but it's just not happening yet. How do you kind of say in a way without being defensive, hey, I know what I'm doing, I just got to have a few more months, or I know ease off kind of in a nicer way?
Yeah, well, I mean, part of it again is to get curious again,
Mhm.
right? Just say, hey, mom and dad, like you feel really strongly about this. Like, what exactly do you want from me, right? By putting this, by insisting that I do this, like, what do you really want from me, right? And a simple answer for a lot of parents is that I want stability for you, right? I
Mm.
want you to be able to pay your bills. I want you to be able to make sure you're taken care of, and then you can say, oh wow, that is something. I think we both want that, mom, actually, right? I think we do. We both want stability. And you can ask them, what is the cost of that stability if I'm not doing something that I love, right? Like,
Wow.
why, what, I understand, like, sometimes you have to pick the first thing that comes along because you have a wife and kids and you're like, I got fired. I can't just like hold out for my dream job because I got other mouths to feed. But that's a decision that I have to make and not my parents, right?
Right.
It's like when they pressure you to get married, you're just sitting there thinking, wait a second, why am I getting married for you? Like
Hmm.
you know, like I'm the one that has to spend the rest of my life with this woman, right? Like
Hmm.
and I'm not sure as much as you think what I should be pursuing, right? I'm going to trust that I'm the expert on my life, right? And you might know a lot about me, and at the same time, maybe we negotiate another 6 months. No one says it's set in stone, right? Just say, okay,
Right.
well, am I still making rent? Am I still paying my bills? Well, yeah, you don't have a lot, but it's like, but I am, right? And just kind of point them back to the evidence to say, hey, look, this isn't about me, getting my way. I'm just showing you, hey, look, there's evidence here that yeah, I'm being adult, I'm being responsible, I'm paying my bills. It's not a lot, but I haven't defaulted on anything, right? The
Hmm.
repo men haven't come. So yeah, like even if I have to kind of suffer or, kind of go lean for a little bit, I'm going to ask you to trust me that and trust in the way that you raised me that I'm going to find my way forward with this.
Yeah, and I really like that. Point to the evidence and the fact that you guys are both going for the same thing, right? Like both want stability, you both want somebody to be with that you're going to be happy with in terms of the marriage equation. And it's just a matter of you're the expert in knowing what you would want to do and knowing who you to look for and knowing that you could quote unquote sell out for a corporate job that you will hate just to pay the bills, but that'll put you in a position where it'll affect other areas of your life, like you mentioned. And this podcast always mentions, mental health and all the other categories that are extremely important, not just money. So I like the way you worded that, and it's definitely something that I'm reflecting in my mind of things that I've had conversations with. I'm a little bit more upfront, I guess. I used to be conflict avoidant, and then I was just like, yeah, this is not the thing. It is easier to be conflict avoidant. We were talking a little bit
Mhm.
before we started recording, due to the fact of social media, due to the anonymity of social media, and the fact that you can kind of hide behind the screen and say anything you want. And if somebody says something that's on the contrary, you can either block them, report them, ignore them. You don't have to necessarily deal with the conflict to resolve it. You can live through life being 100% conflict avoidant through social media and the technology that we have today. Why is that the case that we shouldn't do that, even though it's the easier thing?
Well, I mean, you know, how close are you going to let people get to you? Like, how do you expect to have any meaningful relationships if you have behind a screen your whole life, right? If you don't let anybody in, yeah, on one hand, nobody will hurt you, but at the same time, like if you're just, happy to launch, missiles from your fortress, like what kind of person are you, right? And part of conflict, and in a previous podcast, I talked about, everyone's like, one of the myths is to think that you have to restore every relationship to 100%. And that's not realistic. That's
Yeah.
exhausting if you try that. I mean, it's a noble idea to pursue that, but some fights aren't just worth your time or energy or salt, right? To discern with the online trolls and things like that, one mantra I use is to don't take criticism from someone you would take advice from. That helps kind of filter out a lot of the noise that you see online. And you just have to ask them, right? Have you just resolved to be unhappy that you just have to like, just like make it like spread around your misery just so that kind of bring everyone down to your level? Or, are you actually going to strive for something better? But, yeah, there's no point in engaging trolls that aren't going to take your comments seriously. So part of it is just knowing what to drop and say, okay, like, is this noise I want in my life? No, it's like, okay, maybe you don't have to block the troll, but maybe you find a good way to avoid it because words still hurt, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and there's certain areas where you can avoid. Like how are you going to get close to somebody? Something that you mentioned that I think is really important, because you do want that, and you want that close relationship, the quality of the relationship. And to do that, you have to be vulnerable, and you will inevitably lean to conflict. It'll just people are different, and that's what conflict is for, is to resolve that. So it's a good way you put it that way. And there's different backgrounds that handle conflict differently. I'll say it that way. And there's gender, there's race, there's age, there's a bunch of different, any demographic you can think of deals with conflict extremely differently. And how would you kind of coach people to understand their background and how their current preconceptions of conflict and conflict resolution is, and how to get them more aligned so they can be open to other people's ways?
Yeah, great question. The book I'm going to reference is called Humble Inquiry by Edgar Schein. And
Huh?
he just has this great example of this like multicultural surgical team where, the doctor comes from like an American background and he's very outspoken. And then you have, like a Korean medical assistant and then someone else who's Hispanic. And they're all having to try to navigate each other's social norms and tripwires, right, as they take care of a patient whose life is on the line, and could die, like if they decide that, oh, like you offended me and therefore I'm not going to help you, right? And yeah, like this is where curiosity comes into play to say, hey, and that posture of humility to say, hey, teach me about your culture, right? I don't
Mm.
know a lot. I know I've been exposed to some, cultural things in TV that may lead to some preconceptions that are inaccurate, even if they're funny. What do you want me to know about you? Like, how can I demonstrate that I respect you and that we can, how do we build the level of trust where we can work well together, right? And to be willing to be coachable and take that information and actually apply it, I think it's a really good start, because you're just showing, hey, look, I'm genuinely interested in getting to know you and getting along with you. Would you be willing to do the same for me? And I think, who would say no to that, right? Like, I don't know. Like if someone does say no, I just feel like, okay, well, thank you for your honesty, and make sure I never see him again.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a good point. You wanna always, seems like, invite the curiosity is the common theme here, is to not take that first assumption and get on the offensive immediately. Is just to say, hey, let's just figure out your point of view and then see where we can go so we can collaborate. I think Crucial Conversations talks about that a lot as well. I think it's, I can't remember the author, but I'll have it in the show notes.
Yeah.
That was a good book about getting like one pool of options, everybody's input, and then that's how you kind of work through resolving it. So what are some common mistakes people fall into when they're trying to resolve conflict?
Oh yeah. First is avoidance, right? Just to say, even worse is like they rationalize to themselves that somehow it's not as big a deal, and that, yeah, I feel bothered by it, but no, I'll get over it. Just give me enough time. And then even worse, right? You start to overcompensate. So, the example I use is, let's say a technician makes a mistake, typing up a script, and then they say, well, maybe it's just an oversight and I just fix it. But then it happens again, and I'm just like, well, I don't want to, the avoidance comes in, right? Now I don't want to confront them on this. So let me just fix it again. Now
Mhm,
I'm enabling them, because all the times I fix it, they don't know I'm fixing it, right?
mhm.
So they're still doing a bad job, but now I'm doing two jobs for the price of one. And now I'm getting burnt out because I'm overcompensating. The
Right.
second is when you swing to the other side, the pendulum swings to the other side, right? And you say, I'm just going to charge ahead and take this on. I'm going to do this. I'm going to be blunt and they're going to have to respect me. That doesn't work either. I had to
Mhm.
confront the pharmacist who, dispense the medication to the wrong patient, and she would continually blame the technician. No, it's this fault. She typed it up wrong, and I'd have to say something like, "True or false? It is your responsibility to catch and fix any mistakes before they leave this pharmacy." Yes. Yeah, but I don't make mistakes. It's like, but clearly one left. So the evidence is it's not in your favor. So what are you going to do differently? Well, I guess it's ignore copy. And I just said, no, that's unacceptable. And
Yeah.
I can twist her into compliance, but it's her, if as long as her heart is resentful, I'm going to have a disgruntled teammate, and I can't have a disgruntled teammate. Number two is like charging ahead, and then three is like arm twisting, right? So those are some
Mhm.
of the common mistakes, and that's what a lot of people think conflict is. It's just like, I just have to convince this person that they're wrong and that I'm right, and then
Mhm.
just finally get them to understand why I'm right and just tell me I'm right. And that's more about ego, even if it's like in this case for patient safety, like I need to convince her that I'm right, which is, instead of inviting her to collaborate and say, hey, look, do we believe that it's important to get this, to dispense things accurately? Yes. Okay. How can I help you make sure that this doesn't happen again? Right. And I have to show her that we're actually on the same side. I'm not this boss that's trying to pin her for like a mistake.
Mhm.
I'm really like a guardian that's trying to look out for her. But then you don't want to wear out the goalie either. That's just enabling. I think those are the most common mistakes that people make. And then just recognizing other times, um, Like, I think some people, they overreach sometimes in an effort to placate. They'll take responsibility for things that they didn't actually do. That's another mistake, and say, well, I should have done this or that or that. There's a degree of that. You need to say, hey, here's how I'm going to help do my part to make sure like this mistake doesn't happen again. But you don't have to apologize for anything you didn't actually do.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. And that brings up a question that gets asked a lot in HR interviews, and something that I struggle with, I guess, because I know my answer and I'm more like well, I'll share my answer after, but with a
Sure.
question that is, if a coworker is not doing the thing that you asked them to do, and it's kind of their role to do, how do you kind of get around that? Do you escalate on them? I mean, following up with them is clearly not working, right? What is your next step? Do you escalate? Do you go around them and just do it yourself? How do you
Mm.
get them essentially to do their job so that you as a team can get the job done?
Yeah. Great question. And I'm sure it happens a lot. So
Mhm.
the phrase I like to use is from John Maxwell, who says, people don't always do what's expected, but they will always do what's inspected. And so, in order to hold people accountable, you don't, again, it's not pinning them and scrutinizing them. Hey, if you're not doing your work, I'm going to catch you and write you up. It's
Mhm.
more of just shining a flashlight on an area that you want addressed and say, hey, where are we with this project? And they could say, oh, yeah, I've got about 5 pages worth of that report written. And you say, well, didn't we agree to 10 like by now? And they'll say, well, I had this and this come up. And then as a leader, right, your job is to kind of negotiate and finesse, okay, so what else do you need from me as a leader that I can help you make sure that this report is up to speed, right? You invite them. It's a continued collaboration. Hey, I need your help, right? And you can
Mhm.
emphasize the point. Hey, look, I as a leader, like the paradox of leadership, I cannot do my job well unless you do yours well, right? You were hired because we believe that you were creative and resourceful and dependable in order to get this job done. Do you consider yourself a creative, resourceful, dependable person? Well, yeah. It's like, okay, so how are you going to demonstrate these qualities now in order to get this report up to speed and making sure that it meets the expectations that you and I both needed to do, right? And now they have the weight of ownership, right? Not to like crush them or suffocate
Mhm.
them, but to realize, hey, you know what? We all need to kind of carry this together.
Right.
And it's a very inviting way to show them, hey, my boss is not here to condemn me. He is for me, and he's going to give me tough feedback, not because he's trying to make me look bad, but because he honestly needs me at my best so that he can focus on what he does. Right. So that is, one thing you could try. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's plenty of times, even like the nicest sounding plan still doesn't work, right? No
Of
plan
course.
survives
Yeah.
attack by the enemy. But your chances, I believe, of success are much higher when you continue to say, hey, look, I'm just kind of come alongside, right? Where
Mhm.
are we with this? What do you need from me? How else can I support you? Right. Most people aren't going to take those questions as, oh God, like, no, stop that. Right. It's like,
Right.
no, I got it, boss. It's like, but clearly you don't, right?
Yeah.
Like we already agreed that like this report is still short of like expectations. So I'm not here to pin you. I'm not here to mock you. I just need to know, like in the time we have left, how do we make sure that, we cross the finish line the way we need to, so that you and I can both keep our jobs. Right.
Yeah, and I think that that is one thing as a leader when I was still in corporate was something that I had to learn as well, because originally like the messaging kind of changes when you guys are peers on different
Mm-hmm.
teams, and you're not necessarily their leader or their boss. You're just a fellow team member, another division that you kind of working on a platform project, and that was a little bit harder, I think. So
Mm-hmm.
what would you recommend if you guys were peers and you're not necessarily that person's leader or boss?
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is, I feel like peer to peer is actually a lot easier because it's one thing
Mhm.
to be like the fun uncle instead of the uncool dad. And I say this because, at my previous job, when I first started, I was basically like third fiddle. So I'm just like, oh, I'm just here to solve problems. I can do this. I don't have to like, I don't have to lead a team and keep them motivated, any of that
Mhm.
stuff. I can just do my job well. And, anytime I see a problem, people say, oh, yeah, Jerry's just looking out for me, right?
Yeah.
And he's just trying to help me fix problems. He's not getting in the way. He's not, saying why aren't the numbers better? He's just trying to help me, right? He's my friend. And
Mhm.
there's this interesting intersection of influence and authority that was mentioned in a book called Designing Your Work Life that I've really taken to heart, because at one point I taught a leadership workshop called Leadership Without Titles, just emphasizing that true leadership is, as Maxwell says, more about influence than a
Mm-hmm.
title. Because, right, as you know, just because someone is president doesn't mean we respect them, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, right, that authority still, the title still carries, with it opportunities and accountability and responsibility that can be leveraged to make someone more effective as a leader, right? Because, as long as I am a citizen and I'm not in any position like an official office or something like that, right, I don't have access to a lot of things that, an official leader would. But at the same time, influence is still, I think, the major thing, because unless you have credibility, as long as you have credibility, people will listen to you regardless of the
Right.
title you have, right? As long as you are competent and you are willing and available, you're probably going to get a lot of attention.
Yeah, and I like that. Like leader without a title is Robin. I think Robin Sharma also wrote a book about something with a similar title, and essentially your influence is extremely important. The title helps carry you and put you in some conversations that you may not otherwise be in, especially in corporate, but your impact can be without having that title. So you mentioned a couple of books there, and I'll have all those links in the show notes. But is there any other podcasts or books or YouTube videos or anything else that you learned on your journey towards conflict resolution that you'd like to recommend to the audience?
Yeah, the three specific books I'll talk about: Difficult Conversations. You just type it into Amazon, it'll come right up. They clearly picked a good title for it, because the first thing you type in is probably going to be the search result. The book that really I took to heart was Four Conversations by Jeff and Lori Ford. And the specific kind of conversation, there's initiative where you cast vision, there's understanding where you suss out, misconceptions or, solicit feedback. You have performance conversations where you set specific promises and follow through on them. And then you have closure conversations, which is where resolving conflict comes in. And they just have a lot of good tips on, apologize even if it's not your fault, or just know what to apologize for, right? You can say, hey, I'm sorry, things aren't better between us. Or you say, sorry, something like, I'm sorry that this project didn't go as expected. How can we get back on track, right? And so now it's very much, hey, let's affirm the relationship, let's restore and recommit to things, right? Another book is Decisive by Chip and Dan Heath, talking about, hey, scripting out your critical moves whenever you have a tough conversation. Learn to rehearse courage so that when you're in, the dojo, you can practice. And then when you're on the street fighting, it's like, okay, I developed the muscle memory I need to be sure I don't default to comfort and avoidance like I used to.
Nice.
Yeah.
So I'll definitely check out all those books, honestly, because I've only read a few, Getting to Yes and Crucial Conversations, but I feel like you said, continuous learning and getting better, so that whenever you're in that situation, it becomes more on autopilot. You have the confidence that you can resolve the problem. That was the first quote C in the four C's that we talked about earlier. So definitely things that I learned about, which is why I love this conversation and the podcast. But where can people find you and learn more about you, Jay?
Sure. You can find me on LinkedIn, but the website that has all the fun stuff like book summaries and a free PDF download on the framework to handle difficult conversations, and to even schedule a complimentary 30-minute call, which is I value at $75, but is going to go up after the end of this podcast. Adaptingleaders.com. So yeah, again, that's www.adaptingleaders.com. Just
Nice.
check out the website, see what you think, and then just take all the free goodies and see if that leads to anything useful in your life.
For sure. And I'll definitely have that in the show notes, as well as your LinkedIn. And I hope people connect with you, because I think if you don't know, if you're avoiding it your whole life, like I said, you won't have any deep, meaningful conversations or any relationships. That is one of the 5 categories of success. So I'm hoping people reach out and get better.
Me too. But yeah, I hope this is helpful in a lot of ways. So I'm excited to see what kind of dividends this pays in your life and for those who are listening.
I appreciate it, Jerry. Thank you for your time, man.
Thank you.
That concludes another episode of the Successful Millennials podcast. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode and which tip or trick you picked up on that you'll implement after listening to today's episode. Please don't forget to leave a like or subscribe on whichever podcast streaming platform you're listening to right now. Obviously, we're on all of them. And let me know what topics you'd like to learn more on or ask a guest on. And my email is going to be in the show notes. It's financezilla@gmail.com. That's the best way to reach out to me. If you have Instagram and you prefer to reach out there, I'm also quite active and I'll respond to DMs. It is at financezilla. Again, both of those will be in the show notes. Now, if you're wondering on how I got to where I'm at, where I was able to retire from corporate and kind of do this as well as invest and trade in the stock market, and you would like to learn more, kind of take control of your finances and therefore take control of your life and being able to do what you want to do, being financially independent, reach out to me via either of those ways and ask for that 30-minute free strategy consultation session. The link again will be in the show notes for that, and we can talk about how to live the life you want to live and make money doing it, as well as be comfortable and happy. That's, I think, the goal of everything. That's the reason why I started this podcast and why I do this consulting business. So reach out, let me know if I can help, and apply via the link in the show notes. Until then, talk to you guys next week.